Hello, I am Mr. Jaffa, the Middle School Dean of Students,
And I'm Mrs. Kunz, the middle school counselor.
and we are here to talk about SAP today.
Mr. Jaffa, what does SAP stand for?
It's a good question. We have a ton of acronyms here. So SAP stands for the Saints Advisory Program.
Okay, and when will it meet?
SAP, or Saints Advisory Program, will meet every Wednesday throughout the year, whether we're on campus or in distance learning.
And what kind of things will we do in SAP?
We do so many different things in SAP. We do really fun advisory bonding activities. We also do a lot of other things like digital citizenship, your student-led conferences, and we're going to use SAP this year to really dive into some deep and more challenging issues that are facing our school community and our country as a whole.
What kind of conversations will those be like?
Yeah, those are going to be, I think, really interesting. So obviously, this summer brought out a lot of I would say anger and frustration and an awakening in our country about the treatment of minorities, specifically blacks, and we're going to be looking deeper into that. I think what's really interesting is that we're going to use a lot of the curriculum that we learn in school already and then dive deeper into it.
Wow, it sounds like these SAP conversations could be hard, and you're expecting a lot out of us.
Well, I would say that we're expecting a lot out of the students in the sense that we know that they are capable of this. But really what we expect out of a student each week is to come with an open mind, a willingness to learn, a willingness to share, and just a little bit of a sense of bravery. And you do that and it'll go very, very well.
So why are we having these challenging conversations in SAP?
So our goal every year is to make the middle school a welcoming, inclusive place. But that is, I would say, even more of a focus this year. And having these conversations is an important step towards making the middle school a place that is inclusive and feels belonging for everyone. Just ignoring these topics or hoping they go away, it might feel more comfortable in the moment, but it doesn't really do any of the work to make our community a better, more inclusive place.
What happens if those conversations feel hard or uncomfortable in advisory or SAP?
Well, my first answer would be good. If they don't feel hard or comfortable, then we're probably not making any progress, and we're probably not learning and pushing ourselves. But I totally understand. These conversations are hard to have, and I understand you could be nervous or uncomfortable about them. The point is that I think it's important to keep in mind we are all one Saints family. And we are coming to these conversations out of a sense of respect for each other and love for each other, and we're here to learn and to grow. It's okay if those conversations can get a little bit deep and can get a little bit challenging. Just know that you are in an environment and in a community surrounded by people that trust you and respect you. And if you ever have any questions or issues, you can come talk to me. I assume you can come talk to Mrs. Kunz, your advisor, your parents. These discussions are important, and even if they're a little bit uncomfortable, it's important that we have them.
Sounds like we're going to have a great year in SAP.
Absolutely. All right, so it's time for our first SAP activity. And Mrs. Kunz, you asked me a lot of questions about SAP. I might have a handful of questions for you about our first activity. We're asking the kids to fill out an identity wheel. I'm about to pull up the identity wheel that they're going to be filling out. But as I do, can you just tell me, what is a social identity?
Okay, so historically we've talked about there's been kind of big 8 social identifiers, and these are things like race and ethnicity and gender and national origin and age, and these are considered things that people use to kind of identify themselves. You can see on your wheel that there's actually 11, so we've added a couple of them, but we're going to just spend some time kind of going through defining some terms so you know kind of what each thing means, and then you can go ahead and answer these on kind of based on your identity. And then we also have some questions for you to think about in the middle of the circle, and so we'll kind of move through those and you'll fill those out as we go along.
Okay, and so we're not actually asking anyone if they don't want to fill out what is their ethnicity. It's mostly looking at these numbers here. Is this an identity I think about a lot? I don't think about a lot. I want to learn more about. Okay, so
Yep.
good.
So if you want to put your, if you want to answer the social identifiers, feel free. You can type in there. Mr. Jaffa made a document that you can write on. If you don't want to, you don't have to. The only thing we want you to do is to think about it. So even if you don't write it down, think about what that means to you in your head, and then make sure you put your numbers down. Sound good?
It does. All right. So I normally just think of myself as Mr. Jaffa, the Dean of Students. So I'm going to have to dig a little deeper here. All right. So let's start. We're going to go clockwise, and we'll start at like 12 o'clock. So what is ethnicity?
Well, actually, let's back up.
Okay.
Let's start at 11 o'clock.
Race? Yeah.
Because sometimes race and ethnicity are a little bit complicated, and sometimes people get them maybe confused or aren't sure the difference between the two. So let's start there. So for race, so an important piece of all of this conversation, and this one will come up a couple of places, is the idea of a social construct. So a social construct is an idea that has been created and accepted by society. And basically what that means is that we know that biologically there's no difference between people who might have brown skin and people who have white skin or anywhere else in between there. So race plays a really important place in our society. And so we need to talk about that when we are talking about our identity. So when we're thinking about race, terminology you might hear is Black, white, Latino, Latinx. So any kind of those terms.
Okay.
For you, Mr. Jaffa, what would you write from there?
Well, so I mean, I guess I'm going to write it, although no one has to write it. But I'm going to say that I am white, and I think it is actually a number 5 here in terms of it's an identity that really affects the way people perceive me. Something that's really probably benefited me being white throughout my life.
Okay.
But then, what is my ethnicity then? I don't.
Okay, so this is different. This one recognizes differences between people mostly on the basis of language and shared culture and also geographical location. So you may hear things like Puerto Rican or Italian, or for me, I think of myself as Irish.
Okay.
So what would your...
So that's tricky. So, yeah, and actually, we're going to have to even back up one further, because I kind of almost think of myself as Jewish, which I know is a religion, but it's also kind of a culture and an ethnicity. So can I put that?
I think that you can, and I think that also perhaps one of the things that sometimes helps me is kind of where's your family from? And
so,
not
my family's from various countries in Europe.
Okay, so maybe you could write European if that felt right, or Jewish feels if that feels right. One thing to keep in mind is that there's not a right or wrong answer, right? This is your identity, so you write down the things that feel that feel most important to you and feel right about the way you're describing yourself. These are just different categories that we want to kind of think about. And then what would be...
Yeah, that has a strong effect on the way I perceive myself, I would say. And then I'm just going to, because we already talked about it, I'm going to put Jewish over here as well.
Okay, and you understand like a religious or spiritual affiliation? You understand what that means?
Yeah, and it's interesting being Jewish in an Episcopal school. And actually, I think about it a fair amount because I'm Jewish, I work in an Episcopal school, and my wife is Catholic. So I don't know if it's like truly number 1 in terms of the thing I think about the most often, but it's up there.
And it's an important part of your identity.
It is. All right, let's keep moving let's go counterclockwise because we're going that way anyway.
Okay. All right. Age. You know what age.
I know what that means. I don't even need to ask you. It's how long we've been on Earth. I just turned 40, so actually I've been thinking about it more and more as I've gotten older. Again, I don't know if it's like number 1, but it's up there.
Okay. I know you did not write your age in the box.
Oh, I'm not 1. Yeah. But I'm 40. I'm saying I'm very clear. I'm 40 years old. Just turned it over the summer. Ability.
So this is actually, if you can see that it says in parentheses disability.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a physical, emotional, developmental disability. Let me make sure we've got kind of ability or a disability conditions due to an impairment in physical, learning, language, or behavior areas. Is that anything that's kind of in your mind?
Yeah, no. So I am, I would say, physically and emotionally able. And so I would put it as a 2, and I think I'm really kind of fortunate in that it's not something that I need to think about. But I would imagine that if I had a disability, it'd be something that I would have to think about probably a lot.
Absolutely. And some disabilities you can see. Perhaps I think of somebody maybe perhaps who's in a wheelchair,
Right.
or who maybe has some disability with vision and has a seeing eye dog. And then there's also lots of disabilities that you can't see. Sometimes I think of like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, what they talk a lot about veterans. And some of those things you can't see, but they're really still very important for people's identity. Okay.
All right, first language, I think I know that. So that's the language that I primarily speak like at home, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So it's an easy one for me to answer because I don't even have a second language. So sorry to the language teachers out there, but I was never very gifted with that. So English, and it's also not something I think about most of the time. But, all right, national origin. So is that where I was born, or where my like parents or grandparents were born, or how do we define that?
We kind of think of that one more kind of as a legal sense of belonging to a political nation state. So if it's kind of like a citizenship, like you are a United States citizen.
So I could put like American in here, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And again, I think, probably because I was born in America and because I live in America, it's not something I think about that much, my like citizenship status. But again, I imagine if I lived overseas or if I was born somewhere else, I bet it'd be something that would have a lot more impact. Sexual orientation.
Okay, so this one sometimes can get a little complicated. This is your emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. So to put it simply, it's about kind of who you like or who you love, and not like as like a friendship, and more of a kind of romantic place. So who you like, that's right.
As we
and so, yes. And so some of this for middle school, this may not be something that people are thinking about, or this may be something that people are thinking a lot about, but I think it's important. And terms you may hear with that are heterosexual, homosexual, gay, straight, bisexual, all kinds of those different places. And so I think as we kind of think a lot about things that are happening in society and in the country, it's good for us to understand some of these terms because sometimes they can get a little confusing.
Yeah, so I guess I would say, if I was filling it out, I would say that I am straight, but it's certainly not something I thought a lot about as probably a middle schooler, and it's still, again, I would say something I don't think about a lot. All right, now I know I'm going to ask about two at the same time because I think I confuse them, and I think they get confused. So, gender and sex.
Okay, so we'll start with sex first. So sex is a biological difference between, now, the way these are complicated. So sex and gender are very closely entwined. And gender, remember, as we were talking about race, gender is also a social construct. So we know now that kind of there are biological differences, but the way we think about things and the way that society is often, right or wrong, often split up is really between male and female, and women and man, and kind of all of the expectations that go with that. So sex is really talking specifically about your biology, about particular body parts, and about chromosomes. So that's kind of a male or female. We know now that it is not a binary system, but when we kind of think about it on here, so you could think male, female, and then there's a lot of other terms kind of in between there.
Okay.
And then gender is much more about kind of the gender roles and your expression and your identity. So I think of sex as kind of the biology, and gender's kind of the way you feel. You feel more male or more female. But again, it's a social construct. So it's something that society, we kind of run by, whether it's right or wrong, that there are these kind of specific gender roles.
So I happen to have the same answer for both, but it's very possible that people would not. Correct?
Absolutely. And, I think it's okay to feel a little uncomfortable and kind of unsure about these because I think they're confusing. And I think a lot of times growing up, it felt like it was just one thing or another, like male or female, and now there's a lot of in between. So these are kinds of concepts that we're all kind of learning on how to talk about and how to understand.
Okay, and we are almost finished. And the last one is socioeconomic status.
Yes, and this one's also known as SES. And this is more about a social standing of a class, of an individual, of a group. It can be measured by a combination of education and income and occupation and wealth and assets. It sounds like it's probably a lot about families and less about students in middle school, right? You guys, your job is a middle school student, so you're not doing a whole lot of bringing in wealth. But things that you may hear about those terms that may be related to that are middle class, lower class, high, upper class, and I think you can probably hear a lot of things about that in the news and kind of things that people are able to have access to based on kind of their wealth.
So if I put upper middle class, is that okay?
Does that feel okay to you?
It does, and it is actually something I think about a lot.
But again, this one is one that people feel pretty uncomfortable sometimes talking about money and talking about wealth. And so, but it is really good for us to kind of understand what it means, because I think it plays a big part in all kinds of things in our society. So our biggest piece is we really want you all to start to understand what these terms mean. Even if you don't feel comfortable or don't know where you would fit on a lot of these, we just want you to understand the definitions.
Well, thank you. Thank you for helping me think of myself as more than just a dean of students.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mr. Jaffa.
Yeah, and good luck to all the students filling it out.
Great.